It's time to attack the fantasy basketball waiver wire with gusto, vigor, aggression, niceties, however you want to do it. We're just going to look at players who are on the waiver wire that you should be paying attention to. Michael Bolton, he's already all across it, but what do you think?
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and even though I've been assigned to the G League, I'm definitely not healthy. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com. You can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok, at redrock_bball, and on Instagram, at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's JASEmedical.com. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. It is going to be an absolute monster of a day today, but first we've got to cover the waiver wire, and then later today we'll have a 14-game recap. There'll also be a Thursday preview show with all of your streaming needs in there as well. So let's get in and talk about the waiver wire across fantasy basketball. A couple of things before I do this. If you guys have any suggestions for waiver wire show format, sections you'd like added, please drop them down in the comments below. I'm not going to action everything that you say, but I'm always taking on board little bits and pieces of this might be useful, this might be useful. I can assess whether I think it's useful or it's feasible or whatever it is. But if there's something you'd like to see different on these shows, please let me know, drop it down in the comments. The second thing is I'm trying to work out percentage rostered in terms of how that correlates to leagues. It's not easy to do. Usually I look at 45% or 50 to 45% is maybe going to be available in 12s, maybe not. 65 is around 10-team leagues. 20% is around 14-team leagues. And 10% is around 16-team leagues. That's usually, or 16 teams and deeper. That's how I tend to look at it. But the data is impossible to know, right? I'm trying to guess this stuff. I don't really know. So I do want to know that when I put up players, and I'm making an effort to put up the roster percentages on Yahoo for all of these players. ESPN, forget it. They have like, hey, here's Nikola Jokic. He's rostered in 4% of leagues. Their roster percentages make no sense, and they're useless. So I'm using Yahoo roster percentages. So I do want to know that when I mention a guy who's in that 12-team range, 45 to 50% rostered, or a 10-teamer around that 60 to 65, is he available in your league? Now, for a lot of you guys, you'll be switched on and that guy isn't. But I'm guessing that those marks that I'm hitting there mean that in about half of leagues around that size, that guy should be available. That's my theory, but I'm always looking to adjust that. I don't know if I'll get anything out of this, but we'll see how it goes. But that's where we're at. Let's start this show where we do like to start this show, and that is the must roster section. These are 6 names. These are not the must roster players. I mean, they are, but they're not. This is not every must roster player in the NBA. These are the guys that I'm looking at who are available in over 20% of leagues according to Yahoo, who are top 100 rest of seasons according to my projections. You can have your own projections. Your league may differ in many different areas, right? These are the guys that I believe are must roster players. There are plenty more must roster players. I cannot cover every single player, every single show. And I'll be saying that a lot because I often get, what about this guy? Yes, sure, maybe. But I can't cover everyone every time. Just we're highlighting the 6 guys that really stood out to me here who are available and shouldn't be. Let's go through it. Jalen Johnson's at 76%. Markelle Fultz at 75%. I know Markelle Fultz is currently injured. Still should be rostered. Dan Gafford at 71%. We saw a little bit of the potential of what he can do last game against the Sixers. And Onyeka Okongwu's at 74%. Now, I understand there are points leagues involved in this, and Okongwu is probably not a must-roster points league guy. Unless you're just hoping and holding and waiting for a trade. And if you are, you wait until February. Like, trades usually don't happen unless there's a Harden type situation until February. You might get one in January and everything else is in February. So if you are in a points league and you're holding a Okongwu waiting for a trade, it's going to be messy for you. But in a category league, he's must roster. Gafford's borderline in points leagues. Gordon Hayward, 78% rostered. He's a must roster guy. So is PJ Washington Jr. at 75%. Now that could change. Must roster can change. So I could come back in 3 weeks' time and tell you, maybe you do have to drop Gordon Hayward, guys, because either A, he's injured, or they've pushed him to a 24-minute-a-night role and Miles Bridges is back, or the production's just been split between all of those guys and none of them are absolute must-roster players. Fantasy basketball and the NBA is dynamic. It's changing literally every hour. Something different is always happening. So I'll tell you now that if Gordon Hayward and PJ Washington are on your waiver wire, they shouldn't be. You should add them. But that doesn't mean we go, all right, we're done. He sits here all season and we never touch it. Because in 2 weeks' time, we could come back and say, well, they're actually droppable now. That's how we have to approach this. It's, I use this analogy often. It's like the stock market sort of thing. Like you're moving and buying and selling and dropping and adding depending on where things are going. And if something was the case on October 1st, that doesn't mean it's the case on December 1st or on February 1st. We just got to move with it. Sure, you all know that deep down, but some of you may not play that out in your real-life assessment of guys. As my voice cracks. Who are some droppable players? Well, there's only 3 that really stood out to me. Now, I could have a million other guys on here. I could say Benedict Matherin's a droppable guy, because he is, but I use a cutoff of 60% rostered and projected by me to be outside the top 150 rest of season. Matherin's at 58, doesn't quite qualify. You hear me sprinkle droppable players all through many shows. But these are some guys I just wanted to highlight that I do think that, again, droppable doesn't mean get them off your roster at any cost. It just means if you're making a call and you're thinking about, hey, is this guy someone I can move on from? The answer to me is yes. You don't have to, but you shouldn't feel beat up about it. And they're relatively high roster players. Isaiah Stewart. Last game was pretty good from Stewart with Duran out, but I think with Duran there, he just sort of doesn't do anything. And now they've signed Fortnite legend Kevin Knox. Who knows what's going to happen? That's a joke. It's not a joke that they've signed Kevin Knox. Of course, Troy Weaver is the joke, but Kevin Knox is not taking from Isaiah Stewart. Anyway, long story short, Isaiah Stewart's not a must-roster 12-team league player. And I don't think Andrew Wiggins is. Yes, I do believe that Andrew Wiggins will improve. Apparently, he's dealing with some sort of rib issue. Must be a really big rib issue. Did he have the Marilyn Manson / Prince surgery? What's happening? What's his rib issue? He can't do anything. He can't play minutes. He can't score. He can't shoot. He can't rebound. He can't defend. He can't do anything. And my thing with Wiggins all the time is, and while I 100% expect him to bounce back and improve, much like I do with all the buy low guys, Trae Young, Karl Anthony Towns, the buy low guys I didn't include, Pascal Siakam, I expect them to improve and get better, even if they're ranked outside the top 100. Rankings are a fallacy. Remember that. With Wiggins, if he does improve, to what end? Like, how good actually is he? The answer is not that good in category leagues. And when you've got a debate of like, will he improve or will he not improve? And if he does improve, what actually is the level of payoff? Well, it's not worth sitting through the nonsense that is now that literally might not improve. Maybe it doesn't. That's possible too. So therefore, Wiggins is droppable. I'm going to throw Bobby Portis onto this list again, even though Bob, the minutes are rising for him. That's not true. The minutes rose last game, but let me explain this to you for Portis. Is that my issue with Portis was he was playing backup only minutes at center, and Jay Crowder was getting all the power forward minutes. But I believe a change is coming very, very soon, if not immediately. That Jay Crowder will get starters minutes playing the 3 in place of Malik Beasley. Which means that if Jay Crowder is getting starters minutes playing at the 3, then Bobby Portis plays more at the 4, which increases his minutes. I still don't think that Portis is 100% a must-roster player. My projections still have him outside the top 150. But it is looking better for him at the moment. And that is, not sure what more you could ask for apart from looking better. But that's where we're at. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with me, Josh Lloyd, from Locked On Fantasy Basketball, this show, to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Now, this is a tough ad for me to go through and read because I am Josh Lloyd. And you're going to hear this on other Locked On shows as well. But I'm here to tell you that when you're prepping for a daily draft, daily fantasy, any sort of fantasy lineup, so you're scouting the waiver wire, you need to provide players that are a guaranteed fit on your roster. There we go. So, who have I picked out for eBay's guaranteed fit fantasy picks of the week? Which name am I going to choose for this show? Let's choose Jordan Hawkins in New Orleans. Now, there is some talk of Willie Green saying he's going to replace CJ McCollum with different guys each time. But it would be very hard for me to sit here and tell you, well, Jordan Hawkins went off, scored 30 points, hit 7 threes, and he's going to get benched for Kyra Lewis next game. Don't think that's going to happen. Now, it could at times, and it might be an interesting thing to see what happens today with Zion out in that game. But Hawkins is a guy that's, and we'll talk about this in a second, his roster percentage has jumped up massively. He does need to be rostered. There are going to be efficiency and shooting issues for Geordie, but for now, the opportunity is sky high, and he probably should be, not probably, he should be rostered on fantasy rosters. So I'm going to try and help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. The same with your vehicle. They've got over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, so you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride for the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, oh yeah, this is great. You're burning rubber and not cash. Woo, yeah. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to US customers. Eligible items only. And exclusions apply. Can't wait to see how the other shows do that ad read talking about the fantasy guys. It's going to be really interesting to see how that goes. Not that I'll hear all of them, but I hope I get a couple of little smatterings of information through from them. So let's look at the most added players across the waiver wire. Jordan Hawkins is number one. This is the last 48 hours. Up 86% using our advanced roster metric over at Basketball Monster. People do love a big performance. They do love a big scoring performance. That's not to say that adding Hawkins is the wrong move. I added him in one league where I missed out on Daniels before the injury. I thought they would move Daniels. I had them both at 30 minutes. I didn't think it'd be 37 versus 21 in my projections. So yeah, I was sort of on Hawkins, but more on Daniels. We're back to Hawkins now. It's not always going to be like this, but he is a guy that should be rostered, but people do love a scoring explosion. Killian Hayes up 51%. Oh, how are the turntables? People are in on Killian now. Killian's a guy that this is how I view Killian Hayes, all right? I really loved him as a draft prospect. He didn't live up to my expectations very clearly. I said in the preseason a lot, I'm not sure where he fits in the rotation. And then they lost 4 or 5 guards through injury, and he's been starting games. And I said he is a bargain basement Ricky Rubio player that when you're looking for assists and steals, look this way. But now that he's hit shots, which, again, is 100% unsustainable, I think he was shooting 27% from 3 and 31 from the field before those last 2 games. That shooting's not sustainable. Now everyone's grabbing him. It also helps that everybody is out, and they've got like 7 rotation players, not including legendary Stanley Umude. But Hayes is getting grabbed everywhere. This will not last. This is a short-term thing, and that shooting will not stick either. But my point from weeks ago remains. He is still a bargain basement Ricky Rubio type with poor field goals, assists, and steals until he loses his job. Eric Gordon, 28% up as well with Booker out. Gordon does have more value than Grayson Allen and Jordan Goodwin. We'll see whether Beal returns, but Gordon is the guy to grab there. They're using our advanced roster metrics, and then we go to look at the Yahoo ones, the most added. Cole Anthony's up almost 4,000 ads. Gary Harris, Markelle Fultz, not sure whether they're playing moving forward or the rest of this week. But the Magic also have a really good schedule on Thursday and Saturday. So he's a good ad. Denny Avdia up almost 3,500 ads as well. He's shooting the absolute lights out. His usage is up. It's not going to hold at that level, but fine, go and grab him. And then Bogdan Bogdanovic, like the Magic, the Hawks have the good 2-game schedule across the Thursday-Saturday combination. There aren't many teams who have 2 games across that time period, and the Hawks and the Magic are 2 of those teams, so they are represented there. The most dropped players. Jeremy Sohan down 22%. I get it. I'm not sure that I would, but I get it. Like, he's been up and down, and it depends on who I was adding. Like, if I needed to add Jordan Hawkins for Sohan, I'm totally okay with that. Sohan is more into a luxury stash type scenario where you're hoping for improvement. It may not come, but if you want to cycle guys in, and as I'll always say, if he's your worst guy in your roster and you're in a situation where you need to get players in, like, get rid of him. That's as simple as that equation is. The cashier, Xavier T. Illman's down 20%. Not only is Bismack Biyombo there now, but Tillman's out for the 2nd consecutive game. I don't know whether they're going to bring him back and start him, but knee soreness on a big man, not a good thing. Extra competition for minutes with Biyombo there, not a great thing. He was struggling to finish at the rim, not a good thing. And he's out. He's not worth holding on to, I don't think, through the injury with a lot of other complicating factors. Now, I still think that he is a better player than Biyombo and a better fit as a starter. but he's out, so move on. That's cool. I don't get it. I don't have a problem. Rob Williams down 14%. Yep, okay. Obviously, he's not going to be in for a long time, if at all. DeAndre Hunter down 1,100 while he is who we thought he was. A couple of really poor shooting games. He has these little stretches where he's really strong, and then it falls away, and then he turns back into DeAndre Hunter. So, yeah, cool. The pencil Harrison Barnesy, down 780 rosters. Cool. Why is he rostered in any 12-team leagues ever? I will bang this drum literally for until my dying days. I'm going out, the machine's beeping. Josh, final words. Don't roster Harrison Barnes. That's it. Grayson Allen down 663. Cool, move on. We don't need to deal with him, with Beal likely returning and also a 14-game slate on deck. All right, what should we move on to next? We should move on to talking about hot players, the Kelly Oubre Memorial List. Who are guys that have been outperforming our expectations over the last 7 days. And number one is 15% rostered legend Drew Eubanks. Nurkic is shooting like an unfathomable 38% from the field. He's one of the worst rim finishers in the NBA, not only just as a big man, but as a player in general. Not to say that he's losing his job to Eubanks anytime soon, but there's a couple of things here. That Nurkic can stink, and Eubanks can get more minutes in any game. Nurkic can't play 30 minutes, so Eubanks gets 18 to 20 every night. And if/when Nurkic gets hurt, Eubanks becomes a top 40 and a top 60 player, right? He's already performing at a top 100 level over the last week anyway, without Nurkic getting hurt. I think Eubanks at 15% is way too low. That's sort of luxury stash, but you're also producing at a 100, 110 type level at the moment. Yeah, he's worth it. Lou Dort, 51%. I don't need to go into Dort too much. I talked about him at length in the Sal High show. Suffice to say, he's not a 60% three-point shooter, so it is going to fall off. It is going to fall off hard, and he will not be worth a long-term roster spot. Grant Williams is 56% rostered. I think he should be on a 12-team roster. This is a great litmus test. If you're in a 12-team league, is Grant Williams rostered in your league? If you're in a standard 12-team league, 12 teams, 13-man rosters, is Grant Williams, this is my call to action, not subscribe, not ring the bell, not tell your friends. Is Grant Williams rostered in your league? Drop it in the comments below. Grant Williams, yes. Grant Williams, no. That's all the comments I need. Nas Reed, 58% rostered. He should be rostered. There is still a minutes crunch with Anderson, McDaniels, Gobert, Towns, and Reed in that front court. But he's performing well and he should be rostered. Taylor Horton Tucker at 38% rostered. He has put up some good numbers. Now, my issue with Horton Tucker is, it's painful. That Jazz team, trash, useless. They are so bad. They're dreadful. And he's part of it. He is part of the problem because he is not a point guard's asshole. And he just is an inefficient player who pounds the ball, dominates the offense, and doesn't work with the other players. It is blindingly obvious to me that Keontae George should be starting there very soon. I don't know when it will happen. But for now, we can roll with Horton Tucker, and we can drop him, and then we can re-add him, and then we can drop him. This is what happens. The last one is Royce O'Neal. Now, this is more a little bit towards deeper leagues, but while Cam Johnson and Nick Claxton, I should have actually addressed what the hell I said at the start of the show, is that on ESPN, and I believe on Yahoo, because Claxton and Cam Johnson got assigned to the G League today, so your two main fantasy providers said that, well, that means they're not injured anymore, and they took them off injured eligibility, so you can't have them in your injured slot, which, of course, is stupid, because they are not returning. They are out for today's game at the very least. You get assigned to the G League, sometimes you do a little bit of work, sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 3 weeks, sometimes it's 3 days. It does not mean that you are returning. Removing that injury tag off them is putrid. It is shithouse from you, Yahoo and ESPN. And I don't know if you fixed it at the time of this, put the injured tag back on. Stop using external forces to screw with people's fantasy rosters and make things unfair when you are blatantly wrong. Fix it. Anyway, with those guys out, Royce O'Neal is performing pretty well. He's not a guy that we love or we're excited about. He's not going to drop 30, but he's enough to be streamed in 12s and 14s. Probably should be just rostered in 14s and even 16s. But he's been putting up some pretty good numbers as of late. The big fella, the Basmati man, Royce O'Neal. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Jace case and Jace Medical. The Jace case is a personalized emergency medication kit that contains 5 essential antibiotics that are used to treat the most common and the most deadly bacterial infections. There are plenty of issues like supply chain issues across the world at the moment with medications. We have disasters that can strike at any point, but they've also got a couple of new things that Jace Medical's thrown in there with the old Jace case, because you get these life-saving antibiotics. That is true. We get all of that stuff, but you can also come in Now, and throw in some more personalized medications for you and your family. In fact, you can get things, life-saving antibiotics, plus a long list of daily medications, and you can order them in a 1-year supply. Even erectile dysfunction generics for Cialis, Viagra, and Revatio. Revatio, I haven't heard of that one. That's a new one since I've been in pharmacy. Prescription. So that all comes through at Jace Case. So go online at jacemedical.com, JASE to receive a 12-month supply on your daily medication as well. Don't forget to use the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a discount as well. Okay, what are we heading into now after we've looked at those hot players? Let's look at some short-term injury replacement guys. Malik Monk's at 48%. He is the guy that replaces De'Aaron Fox. Yes, it's Davion Mitchell, but Davion Mitchell, honestly, he's been so bad this season. I thought he was pretty bad last year as well. But, you know, I'm also, again, always remember, and some of you may be new listeners to the show this season, right? So always remember biases that I would have. I hated the Kings picking Davion Mitchell at 9. Hated it. I thought, what are you doing? This doesn't make any sense to me to pick him here. I hated the Indiana Pacers picking Chris Duarte at 13 in that same draft. And now they're on the same team, and I hated both of them as draft picks, and they are performing at the level that I expected them to. Now, am I biased in that? Yes, because I didn't love them as prospects and have never loved them as NBA players. But I don't think you can argue that Mitchell's been terrible this season. Regardless, this is moot. Because if De'Aaron Fox is out, Malik Monk is the guy that we roster in, and we use him until Fox comes back, and then we reassess. But Monk is better than Herter, he's better than Duarte, he's better than Mitchell. Brandon Miller's at 61% rostered, so this goes more to the shallow leagues. Now, Miller's value is going to plummet, I think. But with Rozier out for, they said, at least 2 games. Hornets injury reporting, the worst in the business, absolute WITB. He's going to be out 2 weeks, minimum I would suggest. Don't believe anything they say with anything they do. Just don't believe it. Don't believe me, but also don't believe them. 2 weeks is my guess for Rozier. Miller will start, and that means he gets more minutes. But we saw last game with more minutes, he struggled. But he should be on a roster for now, at least, while Rozier and Bridges are out. Cole Anthony, Moe Wagner, and Jalen Suggs, all available in over 50% of leagues, and with the Magic having 2 games in the next 3 nights, and Markelle Fultz, Gary Harris, and Wendell Carter all out, there is no reason for Anthony, Wagner, and Suggs, and even Goga Badadze in that list as well, to be sitting on waiver wires. I would argue that Anthony and Suggs have 12-team value irrespective of the status of Harris and Fultz, but that doesn't even matter at the moment because Harris and Fultz are out. So they should be rostered. These numbers should be significantly higher. And then Marcus Sasser sits at 27%. Now, I don't see the 30-minute pathway for Sasser long-term on this team. There's just too many other options there. And he would have to beat out Morris, Burks, Hayes, Ivy, even Bogdanovic to a degree. But everyone's out. So he's going to be the 6th man and play 30-plus minutes. So you should be rostering him for now. And then we can move on and deal with that later on if that is what the timeline requires or demands, some might say. What about some other names that we need to talk about? The big fella, Kelly Olynyk, 25%. Let me put it this way. I don't think this will happen, but if I was William Hardy, I'd have a lot more money. But if I was Will Hardy and I was coaching the Jazz, he'd be starting. And he'd be starting over John Collins because he shoots, he passes, he's an underrated defender, and honestly, he's really good. And he makes the team better. Now, if they're trying to lose, starting John Collins next to Walker Kessler makes a lot more sense. So does starting Taylor Horton-Tucker. So maybe they're tanking to keep their draft pick. Who knows? Maybe that's what happens when you start bad players. But Olynyk played really well last game. He's just someone to watch who's available everywhere, and we might want to use him. Josh Hart's at 48%. Real litmus test today for Hart, because if he plays 32 minutes again off the bench with RJ Barrett back, that means that both Grimes and Quickly are out of the calculation, which I think is a pretty dumb decision from Tibbs, but whatever. If that happens, if Hart is playing 30, then we add him. But there's still too much uncertainty at the moment for him to be an absolute must roster. Kobe White's at 38. I brought this up to say, hey, that's too low. White is playing better. But someone said, Josh, if your main argument for Kobe White is that he's a starting point guard, so he should be 12-team rostered, why were you jacking off Ayo Dosunmu so much last season? And it is a good point. I was going to say on the surface, but it makes it sound like I'm being shady. It's a good point. The reason that I'm not interested in Ayo Dosunmu as a fantasy player as a starter last season, A, he wasn't playing 32 minutes a night. He averaged 26 minutes a night in 80 games last season. He also is a 15% usage player, which is really hard as a guy who... There's certain things in fantasy that are really interesting. You've got to be a really high defensive stats guy, Alex Caruso on this team, The other thing that really does tie into production in both category leagues and points leagues, minutes and usage, right? They're two of the bigger things you can look at. And 28 minutes or 26 minutes a night for Dosunmu is not enough minutes, and 15% usage is not enough usage, especially when you average 0.8 steals, 2.6 assists, and 0.3 blocks. There's nothing redeeming about Ayo Dosunmu's fantasy game. Now, you might say that Kobe White can be a poor shooter. I understand that. I think he's a better shooter than he showed, but he can be a poor shooter. But he's also a better passer, a better assist guy, a higher volume 3 player, more minutes, more usage, more scoring. So while, yes, Dosunmu was a starter, he wasn't a 30-minute plus starting point guard. He wasn't a decent usage player. He never got assists. He never got defensive stats. He never did anything. So that's the difference. So while I can throw a blanket rule out, and I understand that can be confusing. Hey, starting point guard, although I have said starting point guard getting 30 plus minutes, starting point guard means you want to give them a longer leash. If you are a starting point guard and you're not able to get usage or defensive stats or assists, you're useless. Shout out to Ayo Dosunmu. So that's the difference there. So I understand where the confusion lies with that. Jay Crowder at 10%. This ties back into what I said earlier about Crowder and maybe replacing Malik Beasley. So just keep an eye on that. It's a deeper league ad. I've left it a long time to talk Memphis, but here we are. Santi Aldama is at 17% rostered and Bismack Biyombo is at 11%. I am shocked, honestly, that Biyombo is only 11% rostered. He can block shots. Tillman is out. Adams isn't coming back. I think Biyombo probably should be grabbed in every 14-team league and in a lot of 12s. I don't know how it works when Tillman plays, but Biyombo should be grabbed. But it brings me on to the Aldama point. I've mentioned this a couple of times, and I do feel like I'm taking crazy pills at times because I see a lot of stuff about Aldama, right? I see that he's going to be the guy that comes in and takes over the center job. But I look at this and go, why would we suggest this? And people go, well, look at his numbers that he had in his starts last season. Yeah, his starts were in place of Jaren Jackson at power forward. He didn't start next to Jaren Jackson. He started in place of Jaren Jackson. So you can look at his starting role from last season. It is not the same as this season. The Grizzlies haven't wanted to play Jaren Jackson at center, and they don't want to play Santi Aldama at center. Now, maybe their thinking changes because they don't have many options. That is distinctly possible. But these two guys, Jaren and Santi, played 270 minutes together last season. That is it. And when Steven Adams and Brandon Clark went down from the 8th of March onwards, Aldama played 21 minutes a night. His role did not change. It was exactly the same. I looked at what his numbers were from when Adams went down in January to the end of the season, 21.4 minutes. And then I looked at what it was from when Clark went down 8th of March, 21.7 minutes. Didn't change. But I feel like I'm the only person saying this. Every time I see any other fantasy content or anything, anyone talking about, well, I've got to stash Aldama because he's just going to step into the starting lineup. And maybe he does. But I don't know why that is the default assumption. My default assumption is that they don't want to play Jaren at center, and Aldama is not a center either. I could be completely blind to this. And I understand that Santi Aldama is probably a better player than Bismack Biyombo. He's probably a better player than Xavier Tillman. Debatable. But he's not a center. He's not a rim protector. He's not a defender. He's not a rebounder. And it puts Jaren out of position. So, I don't know. Look, 17% rostered, got no problem. You want to grab him, no problem. Especially with Tillman out, they might get more minutes into him. But I guess my pushback is the default position that, well, he's just going to slide in, start, play 30 minutes, look at his numbers as a starter last season when that is literally the completely different context to what's happening now. So I'm not ruling this out from happening. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. My issue is, how is that the default position when there's literally not what any of it meant from last season at all, and none of that transpired ever. It's never transpired. It might, it just never has. And falsely, I've seen plenty of people have even argued back with me and gone on to StatMuse. Hey, what is Santi Aldama's numbers as a starter last season? Cool. Is Jaren out? No. So where do we go from there? Very interested to monitor it. I could look stupid. I do all the time. But I could look stupid by saying this, and then he comes out and Jaren and Santi start together today. I really don't think they will, and I'm not ruling it out. I'm just saying, how is that our default position? Always understand context behind everything, and then also understand that NBA coaches will do everything to tip logic on its head. And I think that is going to do it for us today. Don't forget to follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app. And if you are here on YouTube, thumb it up. Leave your Grant Williams comments down below. Subscribe and ring the notification bell. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.